Alright guys, today we're going to be looking at the volume of a cone. Okay, last week we looked at volume of cylinders, which are pretty similar. So there's not going to be much to this. I'm going to show you the formula and then we're going to run through, plug in some numbers and do the math here. So a cone is a little bit different than a cylinder. Okay, a cone is 1/3 times the base area times the altitude. If you remember, this volume of the cylinder was just the base area times the altitude. Okay, so we can abbreviate it like this right here. Okay, V is equal to 1/3 times capital V times the altitude. Okay, remember the altitude is just how tall the cone is. Okay, and now for the base area, you have to remember that we have a circular base. Okay, and that circular base has a radius. All right, here's your altitude. All right, and so you just have to remember that when you're doing any shape that is circular or whatever, you got to remember the area formula of a circle. So we're going to bring that in here, and we're going to do volume is equal to 1/3 times pi times the radius squared times the altitude. So it's, again, like last time, it's just one big long multiplication problem. You just have to remember to use the radius and square it, and then you're going to have to times by that 1/3. And then just like last week, we'll probably leave the multiplying by pi until the very last part. Just makes it easier to do. All right, so here's a cone. Okay, it has a radius of 2 and a height of 5. So in order to find the volume of it, all we're going to do is take the formula and plug the numbers in. Okay, so here's the formula again in its basic form. Volume is equal to 1/3 base area times altitude. Okay, remember it has a circular base, so switch out the base area for that pi r squared that we know. Okay, and now we're ready to plug in the numbers. Okay, we're going to plug in the 2 for the radius and the 5 for the altitude. Okay, and then just remember it's just one big long multiplication problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 2 squared, which is 4, 4 times 5, which is 20, and then 20 times 1/3 gives me 20 over 3, and then I have my pi using 3.14. Just multiply those together. You can use a calculator if you want, just like last week, and you get approximately 20.93 units cubed. If you're not certain how I got that 20 over 3, just remember it would go like this. 2 squared equals 4. 4 times 5 equals 20. And then 1/3 times 20. Remember, you go like this. And you get 20 over 3. That's where I got that number from, if you're wondering. Okay? So just like last time, plug in the numbers. Do the multiplication. Use a calculator if you need to. Okay? So let's take a look at cylinders and cones side by side, and you can kind of see why there's a little bit of a difference in the formula here. I have a cylinder and a cone. They both have the same diameter and they both have the same altitude. So if I find the volumes of each of these and can compare them, maybe it'll tell me a little bit something about their formulas here. Getting started on the cylinder, okay, I lay out my formula just like I'm supposed to. Then I plug in my numbers, okay, and then I get 5 squared, which is 25. 25 times 12 is 300, and then I'm just going to leave the pi. I'm not going to actually multiply that right now. I think it'll be easier to do if we don't do that. Okay, so 300 pi approximately for the volume of that cylinder. Now let's look at a cone with the same dimensions. Okay, now obviously you can tell that a cone is going to be smaller. Obviously, it goes up to the point at the top and not to another flat circle. Lay out the formulas, plug in my numbers. Okay, now I got all the same numbers as I did before, except I got this 1/3 right here. And so remember, timesing by 1/3 is the same as dividing by 3. So when I do 5 squared, I get 25. 25 times 12 is 300, but then 300 divided by 3 equals 100. Okay, so the volume of the cone is 100 pi units cubed. And then you can see side by side here that if you have a cylinder and a cone with the same dimensions, the cylinder will be exactly 3 times larger than the cone. And that's why the cone has the 1/3 in its formula, because the cone is essentially the cylinder of the same size divided by 3. Okay. All right, let's look at this one here. Okay, so this is another example with two shapes put together. If you can tell, this is, we call it a silo, think of like a farm or something like that. But it's basically a cylinder at the bottom with a cone on top, okay? And so last week we looked at an example where one shape was cut out of another one, and so we subtracted those shapes together. This time we literally have one shape and it's just put right on top of another shape. So this time what we're going to do is we're just going to find the volume of each of them and then add them together. So it's pretty simple. Okay, so we'll do the cylinder separate, and then we'll do the cone separate, and then we'll literally just add those numbers together and figure out what the volume of this massive silo is. So for the cylinder, okay, pi r squared times altitude. So just remember, they give us the diameter, which is 12. So cut that in half, use 6. Now also remember the height of the cylinder is 30. Okay, so then 6 squared is 36. 36 times 30 is 1080 pi units cubed. And I'm going to leave that right there for right now. I'm not going to actually multiply that by pi yet. You could if you want to, but I'm just going to leave it right there and show you something. Now I'm going to do my cone, okay, which we all know now is a third base area times altitude. So for the radius of the cone, it's still going to be 6, just like the cylinder, but the height of the cone is only 8 this time. So make sure I put the right numbers in, then I have my 1/3. So 6 squared is 36. 36 times 8, then divided by 3. Okay, or since it's all multiplication, you can do it in any order you really want. So I could do 6 squared is 36. 36 divided by 3 is 12. And then 12 times 8 is 96. That way I can do it in my head and not really have to use a calculator. Okay, so I got 1080 pi units cubed and 96 pi units cubed. And just like last week, I told you, if you leave it like this, okay, pi serves as like a variable, and now these are basically like terms. So now I can just literally add these together as is to get 1176 pi feet squared. Somehow it went from units to feet. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. Okay, and then remember I said sometimes they actually leave the answers like this. Okay, but then if it's something else and they want to know exactly, we can multiply that by 3.14 and get that the volume of the silo is approximately 3,692.64 cubic feet. Okay, so find the cylinder, find the cone, add them together. Pretty simple. Now this last example I wanted to show you because there was one on the homework last week and there's one on the homework this week, and I know a couple people got confused. It's when they ask you to find either the diameter or the height and not the actual volume. Okay, so here we have a cone, okay, and the volume of the cone is 75 pi. If the cone has a diameter of 10, what is the height of the cone? Okay, so basically when you do this, you're still just going to plug in the numbers, but then you're just going to work the formula in a different way because your variable will end up in a different spot. So if we start with this, right, A equals 1/3 times pi r squared h. If I plug it in, notice that I plug in the 75 pi on this left-hand side here. Okay, that's because that's what the volume is. Probably should fix that then. Huh? That shouldn't say A, that should say V. Oh well, no worries. Okay, so the volume goes right there, and it's equal to 1/3 pi, and then 5 squared because the radius is half the diameter, and then h is really what I don't know. Okay, so I'm going to leave that h, and now basically what I have here is an equation that I have to solve. So basically if I get h all by itself, then I'll know the answer. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take these pi's that are on both sides. I'm going to get rid of them. Okay, if there's one on each side, they cancel each other out. Okay, 5 squared is 25. Okay, so I have 75 is equal to 1/3 times 25h. Now let's just multiply. Okay, so 75 equals 25 over 3h. Okay, because 1/3 times 25 is 25 over 3. And then to solve this equation, okay, you just have to multiply by the reciprocal on both sides. This stuff all cancels out. And then 3 times 75 is 225 over 25. And then 225 divided by 25 is equal to 9. So the height of the cone is 9. Okay, and you can use a calculator to do all this multiplication, division, and stuff like that. But that's how you find the height of the cone or the cylinder or whatever it is. Or even if they were asking you for the diameter, you would just have your x in here, and you would have a number out on the other side. You could find it in a similar fashion. Okay, so that basically covers it. That's the volume of a cone. Volume is equal to 1/3 pi r squared times the altitude or the height of the cone. And just plug in your numbers and do the math. Okay, remember it's just one big old multiplication problem. And remember you can use a calculator to get it done as well. All right, talk to you next time.